Alright, today we're going to be taking a look at two older games. Two very different games. In fact, they're from two different generations and two different genres. Crazy Taxi and WCW Mayhem. Let's start with Crazy Taxi for the Sega Dreamcast. Crazy Taxi was actually one of many arcade games that would make their way onto the Dreamcast. In fact, Sega was known for that period. Even before the Dreamcast, Sega was porting games onto their systems. While Nintendo and Sony had done it too, Sega always seemed to be the best at it, mainly because they paid attention to all the details of the original arcade versions and made their ports as close to the original as possible, and a lot of times made them better. This especially held true for the Dreamcast. Crazy Taxi was originally released in arcades in 1999 and would make its way onto the Dreamcast a year later. Not only does Sega remain 100% loyal to the arcade gameplay, they're actually able to add more to it for the Dreamcast. Crazy Taxi's arcade gameplay is 100% present on the Dreamcast. The gameplay has you assuming the role of a taxi driver, and you have to pick up many customers and take them to their destination. The time that it takes to get to these destinations varies, depending on which customer you pick up. Each customer has a dollar symbol above them, and the color of the symbol usually gives you a hint on the length or difficulty of the customer. For example, green being long and easy destinations, or red, which is usually short and sometimes really difficult destinations. Don't let the short time limits fool you. That doesn't mean that the destination is around the corner. It can get very tough on a lot of occasions. There are two different types of gameplay modes. You have the classic arcade style, where you have a set time limit, and with each customer, you add on more time to the clock. You have to complete as many customers as you can before the time actually runs out. Then there's the set time modes where you have the choice between 3, 5, or 10 minutes. Same basic gameplay, complete as many customers as you can in that time limit. The arcade mode is the harder of the two, and the set time gameplay is a great way to practice for the arcade mode. However, I do find the set time gameplay to be a little more fun. I like the fact that I don't really have to keep getting customers and can explore the city. I can actually get customers at my leisure. There was one more gameplay element added onto the Dreamcast port, and that was the challenge mode. The game offers a list of challenges that you can complete. These are really not required for you to do. I'm really convinced that the developer Hitmaker only added this to the gameplay because they needed more in the game. It's really the only flaw about the game because the challenge mode doesn't seem fully developed, and it really has no reason for being in the game. Graphically, Crazy Taxi holds up very well. The Dreamcast port looks very good, and the sound effects and audio is tremendous. There's really only one flaw with the audio, and that's the characters' lines in the game when they are driving and running into stuff. Hitmaker really didn't take the time to add any more dialogue for the Dreamcast port, so it's highly repetitive. So the drivers and passengers wind up saying the same things over and over and over again. It's a flaw, but it's a minor one at best. So overall, how well does Crazy Taxi hold up? Very well, actually. It's not the most in-depth gameplay ever created, but it's definitely addicting enough to hold any gamer's attention. Next is WCW Mayhem. Now, originally, this was supposed to be Gran Turismo for the PS1, so this review was originally supposed to be car games, but unfortunately, my copy of GT does not work anymore. The really sucky part is that the game makes it all the way up to the loading screen for the race after I'm done setting it up, and then freezes. So yeah, that sucks. So I looked through my list of games and saw WCW Mayhem, which I forgot I even owned. This game was made back when wrestling was on a humongous roll ratings-wise. Both the WWF and WCW were red hot, and there seemed to be no slowing down the business as it had truly entered the mainstream. However, was this seen in the wrestling video games? Both yes and no. By 1999, the video games went back and forth, with both companies releasing both good and bad games up to that point. With WCW Mayhem, it was the first game that WCW would release with the EA games, after leaving THQ when their rival, the WWF, signed up with THQ as well. Wrestling games up to that point were fairly simple. They weren't the most elaborate story-driven games like they are now. Mayhem does very little storytelling and a lot of wrestling. Well, sort of. The gameplay is fairly simple. Just select your type of match, the wrestlers, and start playing. Well, you could try to start playing. One of the first big problems with this game is how unbelievably slow it is. In fact, it reminds me of the WWF games from this generation as well. WWF Warzone and Attitude from Acclaim were equally as slow. However, the big advantage that those games have over this one is the fact that there were larger movesets. With Mayhem, each wrestler has about a total of 5 or 6 moves, and doing them is tricky because the collision detection is awful. Everything else is pretty basic, from the match selection to the number of wrestlers in the game. The controls are not terrible as far as setup, but the response time is poor. There is a very long delay from when you hit the button and when your move appears on the screen. Graphically, the game looks okay. It's not necessarily the greatest looking game from its era, but it could have been a hell of a lot worse. The best part about the game from a technical standpoint is the sound. EA did a great job with the sound, and it's one of the best sounding wrestling games to appear on the PS1. The commentary is boring as hell, but that was expected. So overall, how well does it hold up? Not very well at all. It's slow, it's clunky, and the wrestling moves are far too limited. So that's Crazy Taxi and WCW Mayhem. Again, Crazy Taxi holds up well, while WCW Mayhem is worth forgetting. Well, everyone, that's it for now. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.
Hey, it's time to make some crazy money. Are you ready? Here we go! That's it? Get in.
Thanks!
Let's go.
Take me to the cable car. Up on the hill.
Better hang on.